He bought an old stone mansion where an entire family mysteriously disappeared in the 1970S dot. The house cost only $100. It seemed like the beginning of a new life, dot. But what they found inside changed everything they believed in forever, dot. Subscribe to the channel and be sure to comment where you're watching this video from. The sound of the radiator dying filled the small apartment with a hollow, metallic wheeze, like a sigh that had finally given up. Marcus Harper sat on the edge of the couch, his elbows resting on his knees, the pale morning light cutting across the room and laying long shadows over the peeling wallpaper. He had once promised his wife that their children would never see him broken, that no matter how hard life got, he'd keep standing. But that was before the layoffs, before the factory gates shut for good and the paycheck stopped coming. Detroit had been a city of steel and sweat, and Marcus had been proud to be part of it. For years, he'd worked in the same plant that his father had, his hands shaping car frames and his lungs full of dust and smoke. But pride didn't pay rent. When the plant closed, they gave him a severance check that barely covered 2 months of bills. Since then, every week had been a slow slide into smaller paychecks, shorter hours, and growing silence at the dinner table. Evelyn tried to hold the center together. She took shifts at a diner in the mornings, cleaned offices at night, came home smelling of bleach and burnt coffee. She hid her exhaustion behind a practiced smile for the kids, but Marcus saw the way her shoulders drooped when she thought no one was looking. Their son, Jordan, 15, had grown quiet, keeping to himself, his once bright humor dimming under the constant talk of bills. 8-year-old Leanna, too young to understand money but old enough to feel the tension, had started sleeping with her backpack packed, as if afraid she'd wake up one day and find they had to leave again. The landlord's knock came that morning, sharp and impatient. Evelyn opened the door, wiping her hands on her apron. Mrs. Dorsey stood there, arms crossed, her mouth a tight line. "I need the rent, Evelyn. You're 2 months behind. 10 days, then I have to file." There was no malice in her tone, only the weary certainty of someone who'd said it too many times. Evelyn nodded, her throat too dry for words. That night, they sat at the kitchen table long after the kids had gone to bed. The single bulb above them flickered faintly, and outside the window the city hummed with distant sirens and the lonely whistle of a passing train. Marcus turned the overdue bills over one by one, each a reminder of how far they had fallen. Evelyn didn't cry. She hadn't in months, but her voice trembled when she finally said, "We can't keep doing this, Marcus. There's nothing left to sell. Nothing left to borrow." He stared at the tabletop, the scratches that formed faint lines like a map to nowhere. "I'll find something," he muttered. "You've been saying that since last winter." She reached across the table, took his hand. "Maybe it's time we stop surviving and start trying something different." It was nearly midnight when she found the listing. She had been scrolling through a government website of foreclosed properties, not because they could afford anything, but because sometimes it soothed her to imagine. Most were condemned trailers, gutted houses, or empty lots, but one title caught her eye. Abandoned 1970s stone mansion, $100. She blinked, thinking it was a mistake. The description was brief, almost cryptic. 4 bedrooms, 2 stories, detached garage, property of the county due to unpaid taxes and absence of heirs. The photo showed a gray stone house wrapped in vines, its roof still intact beneath the dusting of snow. "Marcus," she whispered. He grumbled, half asleep on the couch. "Look at this." He leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "That can't be real. It's on the county side, look." He read the rest aloud, his brow furrowing. Located near Red Falls, Michigan. Previous owner, Sloan family. Vacant since 1974. He gave a low whistle. 74? That's older than us. Curiosity led them down a rabbit hole of old articles. The Sloan family had been local legends once, wealthy, well-connected, and then gone without a trace. One spring morning, neighbors noticed their curtains drawn and the mail piling up. When police entered, they found the dinner table still set, food half-eaten, chairs pushed back as if the family had just stood up and never returned. He bought an old stone mansion where an entire family mysteriously disappeared in the 1970 dot. The house cost only $100. It seemed like the beginning of a new life. But what they found inside changed everything they believed in forever. Subscribe to the channel and be sure to comment where you're watching this video from. The sound of the radiator dying filled the small apartment with a hollow, metallic wheeze, like a sigh that had finally given up. Marcus Harper sat on the edge of the couch, his elbows resting on his knees, the pale morning light cutting across the room and laying long shadows over the peeling wallpaper. He had once promised his wife that their children would never see him broken, that no matter how hard life got, he'd keep standing. But that was before the layoffs, before the factory gates shut for good and the paycheck stopped coming. Detroit had been a city of steel and sweat, and Marcus had been proud to be part of it. For years, he'd worked in the same plant that his father had, his hands shaping car frames and his lungs full of dust and smoke. But pride didn't pay rent. When the plant closed, they gave him a severance check that barely covered 2 months of bills. Since then, every week had been a slow slide into smaller paychecks, shorter hours, and growing silence at the dinner table. Evelyn tried to hold the center together. She took shifts at a diner in the mornings, cleaned offices at night, came home smelling of bleach and burnt coffee. She hid her exhaustion behind a practiced smile for the kids, but Marcus saw the way her shoulders drooped when she thought no one was looking. Their son, Jordan, 15, had grown quiet, keeping to himself, his once bright humor dimming under the constant talk of bills. 8-year-old Liana, too young to understand money but old enough to feel the tension, had started sleeping with her backpack packed, as if afraid she'd wake up one day and find they had to leave again. The landlord's knock came that morning, sharp and impatient. Evelyn opened the door, wiping her hands on her apron. Mrs. Dorsey stood there, arms crossed, her mouth a tight line. "I need the rent, Evelyn. You're 2 months behind. 10 days, then I have to file." There was no malice in her tone, only the weary certainty of someone who'd said it too many times. Evelyn nodded, her throat too dry for words. That night, they sat at the kitchen table long after the kids had gone to bed. The single bulb above them flickered faintly, and outside the window the city hummed with distant sirens and the lonely whistle of a passing train. Marcus turned the overdue bills over one by one, each a reminder of how far they had fallen. Evelyn didn't cry. She hadn't in months, but her voice trembled when she finally said, "We can't keep doing this, Marcus. There's nothing left to sell, nothing left to borrow." He stared at the tabletop, the scratches that formed faint lines like a map to nowhere. "I'll find something," he muttered. "You've been saying that since last winter." She reached across the table, took his hand. "Maybe it's time we stop surviving and start trying something different." It was nearly midnight when she found the listing. She had been scrolling through a government website of foreclosed properties, not because they could afford anything, but because sometimes it soothed her to imagine. Most were condemned trailers, gutted houses or empty lots. But one title caught her eye: Abandoned 1970s Stone Mansion, $100. She blinked, thinking it was a mistake. The description was brief, almost cryptic. 4 bedrooms, 2 stories, detached garage. Property of the county due to unpaid taxes and absence of heirs. The photo showed a gray stone house wrapped in vines, its roof still intact beneath the dusting of snow. "Marcus," she whispered. He grumbled, half asleep on the couch. "Look at this." He leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "That can't be real." "It's on the county site. Look." He read the rest aloud, his brow furrowing. "Located near Red Falls, Michigan. Previous owner, Sloan family. Vacant since 1974. He gave a low whistle. 74? That's older than us. Curiosity led them down a rabbit hole of old articles. The Sloan family had been local legends once, wealthy, well-connected, and then gone without a trace. One spring morning, neighbors noticed their curtains drawn and the mail piling up. When police entered, they found the dinner table still set, food half eaten, chairs pushed back as if the family had just stood up and never returned. Just absence. Theories ranged from witness protection to murder-suicide to the supernatural. The house was sealed by the county, but no one had ever claimed it. For decades, every attempt to sell it had failed. Marcus chuckled under his breath. "That's why it's $100. People think it's cursed." "Do you?" Evelyn asked quietly. He shrugged. "I don't believe in curses. I believe in bad plumbing and nosy neighbors." Still, the thought of owning an entire house, even a broken, forgotten one, stirred something in him. Hope had been gone so long it felt strange to taste again. The next morning, they'd check their account. After bills and groceries, they had just over $300 left, enough to cover the fee, the gas to get there, and little else. Evelyn stood by the window, watching the gray light spread over the street. "Maybe this is stupid," she said. Marcus joined her, his hand on her shoulder. "Maybe it's the only thing that isn't." Jordan overheard them and asked, "You're not serious, right? About that creepy house?" He tried to sound amused, but there was a flicker of interest in his eyes. "We're serious," Marcus said. "We can't afford rent anymore." Liana, sitting on the floor with her dolls, looked up. "Will there be a garden?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "Maybe, if we plant one." They left 3 days later, everything they owned packed into the old station wagon. Clothes, kitchenware, a few toys, and a second-hand mattress tied to the roof. The road to Red Falls cut through endless stretches of leafless forest. Snow clung to the branches, turning the world white and silent. It was almost beautiful in a lonely way. Red Falls turned out to be smaller than they'd imagined. A scattering of streets, a diner, a grocery store, a courthouse that looked too big for the town. When they entered the county office to sign the paperwork, the clerk, a gray-haired man with tired eyes, barely looked up. "You here for the Sloan property?" Marcus nodded. "You're sure about that?" the clerk asked. "Folks say that place don't like being lived in." "We'll take our chances," Marcus replied. The man slid a stack of papers across the counter. "You'll need to sign these. Property is sold as is. No liability for damage, history, or anything else." The pause before anything else lingered uncomfortably. When Evelyn handed him the cash, he counted it twice, as though expecting the money to disappear. "All right," he said finally. "She's yours now." Outside, on the courthouse steps, an old man sitting on a bench watched them. His face was weathered, eyes sharp. As they passed, he muttered, That house keeps count of who goes in and who don't come out." Marcus laughed politely and kept walking, but Evelyn felt a chill crawl up her spine. The drive to the property took them down a narrow road flanked by pines. The GPS cut out halfway there. They drove the rest of the way by instinct, following a faded sign that read, "Old Quarry Road." When they finally saw the mansion, they all went silent. It rose behind a rusted gate, half swallowed by ivy and shadow. The stone was dark, almost black in places, but the structure stood solid, defiant against time. Tall windows reflected the cloudy sky. The porch sagged slightly, but the bones of the place were intact. "It's huge," Jordan murmured, his voice echoing in the car, "and weird." Evelyn stared at the front door, its heavy wooden panels carved with swirling patterns now dulled by age. She could almost imagine children running down the path, a family's laughter carried by the wind. Then the image faded, leaving only silence. Marcus climbed out first. The air smelled of cold earth and pine. The gate protested with a long metallic groan as he pushed it open. Gravel crunched under their feet as they walked up the path, the house looming larger with every step. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. Something about the place, its stillness, its waiting, made her uneasy, yet drawn to it. The front door opened with a reluctant creak, releasing a breath of stale air. Inside, dust floated in thin shafts of light that pierced the gloom through half-shuttered windows. The living room spread wide before them. Paneled walls, a brick fireplace, faded floral curtains hanging limp. On a table lay a stack of magazines from the 70s, their colors long faded. Everything smelled faintly of wood and time. Jordan ran his hand across the wall and left a trail through the dust. "Feels like no one's touched this place in forever." Evelyn moved slowly, her footsteps echoing. The kitchen was intact. Old refrigerator, avocado green stove, cracked linoleum floor. On the counter sat a ceramic bowl with the dried husks of what had once been fruit. The sight made her throat tighten. Liana wandered toward the staircase, her small hand brushing along the banister. Halfway up, she stopped and turned toward the wall. "Mommy," she said softly, "someone left handprints." Evelyn approached and saw them, two small prints in the dust, side by side at the height of a child's reach. They looked fresh, too clear to have been there for decades. For a moment, no one spoke. The winter light slanted through the window, painting the floor in pale gold. The silence in the house deepened, dense and watchful, as if the walls themselves were listening. Evelyn placed her hand gently over the prints, feeling the fine layer of dust beneath her fingertips. The air felt heavy, expectant. Marcus broke the spell with a laugh, though it sounded forced. "Kids, this place just needs a good cleaning, that's all." He turned back toward the door. "Let's unload the car." But as they stepped outside again, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that the house had been waiting. Not just empty, but aware. The trees around it stood motionless in the still air. Even the birds were silent. She glanced back once before closing the door, and in that instant she could have sworn that a curtain in the upstairs window moved, just slightly, as though someone inside had stepped away. When the door latched shut behind them, the echo carried through the empty halls, a deep, hollow sound that seemed to settle into the walls. For the first time in years, the Harpers had a home. But as dusk fell over the frozen pines and the last light drained from the sky, none of them could tell whether what they'd found was a beginning or something far older waiting to be uncovered. The handprints remained on the wall, untouched, catching the dim glow from the setting sun like the faint marks of a forgotten welcome. The next morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of light that made everything appear older, as though the world itself had been left out in the rain too long. Evelyn woke first, curled beneath a thin blanket in the front room where they had camped for the night. The floorboards beneath her creaked with each movement, their moans blending with the distant sigh of wind slipping through cracks in the window frames. She lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling where faint stains bloomed like faded memories, trying to convince herself that this house could become a home. Marcus was already up, crouched near the fireplace, coaxing a flame out of the damp wood he had found in the shed. He looked tired but calm, as if the quiet weight of the house steadied him somehow. "Power's working, sort of," he said as Evelyn sat up. "Lights flicker. Heat doesn't. We'll need to fix the generator out back." She nodded, pulling her sweater tighter around her shoulders. It was strange, the feeling that surrounded them now. Not fear exactly, but a hollow stillness that reminded her of a church after everyone had left. Jordan wandered in, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "This place is freezing," he muttered, kicking at the edge of a dusty rug. "Feels like we're camping inside a tomb." He wasn't wrong. Every sound, every breath, every step seemed to echo longer than it should have, as though the house had been waiting so long for voices that it didn't want to let them go. They ate a quiet breakfast of cereal and milk warmed on the stove. The milk tasted faintly metallic, probably from the old pipes. Liana sat cross-legged on the floor, humming softly to herself, playing with her stuffed rabbit and watching her parents move around the room like explorers in a forgotten museum. When she asked if they could open the curtains, Evelyn hesitated. "Later," she said. The light outside was too cold, too sharp, and something about the heavy drapes felt like a shield. By late morning, they began exploring. Marcus started in the living room, examining the walls, checking for leaks or signs of rot. He moved methodically, as he used to on the factory line, tapping the paneling with the back of his knuckles, listening for hollow spots. Evelyn went upstairs, brushing away cobwebs from the banister as she climbed. Jordan followed reluctantly, holding a flashlight even though it was daytime. The second floor was darker, the windows veiled by decades of dust. The air smelled faintly of cedar and something else. Old perfume, maybe, lingering like a ghost of the woman who once lived there. The master bedroom was still furnished, a wide bed draped with a faded quilt, a vanity with a cracked mirror, a jewelry box lying open but empty. Evelyn touched the edge of the mirror. On the dresser were photographs, their edges curling with age. One showed a man in a suit, stern, handsome, his arm around a woman in a floral dress. Their smiles were small, polite. In another photo, the same couple stood with 3 children, a teenage boy, a girl with long blonde braids, and a little boy clutching a toy truck. The caption on the back, written in elegant script, read, "The Sloanes, Christmas 1973. Evelyn carried the photo downstairs. Marcus looked up from the hearth as she handed it to him. "They left everything," she said softly, "even their pictures." He turned the photo over in his hands, studying the faces. Maybe they left in a hurry, but his tone lacked conviction. The picture felt wrong, too alive, too recent to belong to people who had vanished 50 years ago. Jordan found a room at the end of the hall filled with boxes and suitcases. He pried one open and found clothes neatly folded, children's drawings stacked between them, crayon sketches of stick figures, trees, a big gray house with smoke rising from its chimney. One drawing made him pause. It showed the same house, but the windows were blacked out and the sky above it was full of scribbled red lines. He stared at it for a moment before shoving it back into the box. Creepy, he murmured, though part of him was fascinated. Downstairs, Marcus flipped a breaker and the lights flickered to life. A few bulbs sparked, others stayed dead. The old radio sitting on the mantel suddenly hissed, its knobs crackling. Evelyn jumped as a burst of static filled the room, followed by a man's voice, faint, distorted. Hearings in Lanson expected to resume Monday. Questions remain about... Then silence. The radio clicked off by itself. Marcus frowned. Probably a short circuit, he said, but the words came out too quickly, too defensive. They ate lunch standing in the kitchen because the dining room chairs were too dusty to use. The refrigerator was long dead, the shelves inside yellowed and cracked. On the counter sat a glass bowl of fruit turned to stone, apples mummified in their own skins. "It's like time just stopped," Evelyn whispered. Marcus ran a hand along the wall, feeling the cold seep into his fingers. "Time didn't stop," he said. "It just got stuck." After lunch, he went down to the basement. The wooden stairs groaned under his weight. The air below was thick, damp, heavy with the scent of rust and mold. He flicked on his flashlight, and the beam caught rows of shelves lined with old jars, tools, and paint cans. Somewhere in the darkness, water dripped steadily, echoing through the concrete walls. He walked toward the sound, tracing the light along the foundation, until he reached a spot that didn't look right. A patch of cement smoother than the rest, newer. He tapped it with the handle of his hammer. The sound was hollow. He frowned, running his hand along the seam. It was as if someone had sealed something off deliberately. He stood there for a long moment, listening. The basement seemed to breathe, the air subtly shifting, a faint vibration under his feet. Then came a metallic clang, brief, distant, as if a pipe had settled or something inside the wall had moved. Marcus backed away slowly, muttering to himself that he'd check it later. But as he climbed the stairs, he couldn't shake the feeling that the house was aware of his discovery. Upstairs, Jordan had found the attic ladder in the hallway ceiling. Dust rained down as he pulled the cord. "Mom, can I look?" Evelyn hesitated. "Be careful," she said, though she didn't know what danger she feared. The attic smelled of dust and insulation. Sunlight spilled through a small round window, illuminating a mountain of boxes. Jordan opened one and found a reel-to-reel tape recorder, the reels still wound with black magnetic tape. Inside another box were several audio cassettes labeled in neat handwriting. March 12th, the meeting, if anything happens. One had a strip of red tape across it with the words, "Do not play," scrawled on top. Jordan grinned. "Oh, we're definitely playing that," he murmured, stuffing the box under his arm. When he returned downstairs, Evelyn was sorting through drawers in the study. "Don't touch anything too old," she warned. "Some of it might crumble." He ignored her, holding up the box of tapes like treasure. These could be worth something, vintage recordings. She sighed. "Put them away until your father checks the player." By late afternoon, the light outside had turned amber, slanting through the windows in long beams that cut across the dust. Evelyn stood in the living room, gazing at the photographs on the wall. There were more of them than she'd realized. Not just the family portraits, but snapshots of birthdays, holidays, little moments frozen in time. On the last photograph, dated The mother's smile was forced, the father's eyes shadowed. Even the children seemed uneasy. Evelyn found herself whispering, "What happened to you?" Liana, who had been exploring quietly, tugged on her sleeve. "Mommy, I found a doll." She held it up proudly, an old wooden doll with painted eyes and a red dress, the name Emma burned into its back. The wood was worn smooth from handling, but near the name was a dark stain that looked too much like dried blood. Evelyn took it gently. "Where did you find this?" "Under the bed upstairs," Liana said. She was waiting. Marcus came in from the basement, brushing dust from his hands. "There's something strange down there," he said. "Part of the wall doesn't match. I think someone sealed it after the fact." Evelyn turned, frowning. "You think it's dangerous?" "Probably just an old storage space," he replied, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. "Still, I'll bring tools tomorrow and take a closer look." The sun dipped below the trees, and the house grew darker, quieter. They decided to sleep in the living room again, close together. Marcus set up a small battery lamp, its light trembling in the draft that whispered through the cracks. Jordan lay on the floor, scrolling through his phone, though there was no signal. Liana curled against Evelyn, clutching the wooden doll. Sometime after midnight, Evelyn woke to a soft sound, the faint creak of a floorboard upstairs. She lay still, holding her breath. Another creak followed, then silence. Marcus was asleep beside her, his breathing deep and even. She sat up listening. The sound came again, gentle, deliberate, as though someone were walking barefoot down the hall above them. She rose quietly and stepped toward the staircase. The air felt colder there, almost wet. The house was utterly still except for those soft, rhythmic steps moving slowly toward the landing. "Jordan?" she whispered. No answer. She took one step up. The old wood moaned under her weight. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the sound stopped. Evelyn waited in the dark, heart hammering. Somewhere deep inside the house another noise stirred, a faint hum, like the brief crackle of a radio switching on, then off. She turned back toward the living room, her breath visible in the cold air. The lamp flickered once, twice, and then steadied. Marcus stirred but didn't wake. When morning came, the house was quiet again, as if nothing had happened, but the feeling lingered, a sense of being watched, not with malice but with an old, patient curiosity. Over breakfast, Marcus asked if she'd slept. She lied and said yes. Liana, munching her toast, said casually, "Emma told me not to go upstairs last night." Evelyn froze. "Who's Emma?" "The doll," the girl replied, smiling. Later, while cleaning, Evelyn found a small notebook wedged behind a drawer in the desk. The pages were brittle, the handwriting elegant but hurried. She recognized the name on the first page, Mary Sloan. The entries began normally enough, notes about the children, a charity event, her husband's work. But, as the pages went on, the tone shifted. They came again day. Said David needed to answer questions about the contracts. He told me not to worry, but I see how his hands shake when he signs things. Another entry read, "If someone reads this, please remember us kindly. We were not bad people. We just saw too much." The final line on the last page was short, written as if in haste. "Everything is in the room below. David says it's safe there." That night, as they prepared to sleep again, Evelyn looked toward the basement door. It stood slightly ajar, a thin breath of cold air slipping through the gap. Marcus followed her gaze. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. She nodded, but as she turned off the lamp, she couldn't help but glance up at the staircase where the handprints still marked the wall. They were no longer just signs of dust disturbed. They were symbols of something unfinished, something that had waited decades to be found. The house from the past had not forgotten its story. It had only been waiting for someone willing to listen. And now the Harpers were already part of it, whether they understood that yet or not. Morning light crept through the high windows, pale and uncertain, painting thin streaks across the living room floor. Evelyn sat at the small kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm coffee, staring at the open basement door. The house was quiet, too quiet, as if it were holding its breath. Marcus had gone into town early to buy supplies, new light bulbs, rope, and a few basic tools. Jordan and Liana in the way children do when they're not ready to face the day. Evelyn felt the weight of the notebook in her pocket, its pages whispering through her thoughts like an unfinished confession. Everything is in the room below. David says it's safe there. The words wouldn't leave her alone. When Marcus returned, the cold air followed him in. He shook off the frost from his coat and placed a crowbar, a flashlight, and a coil of thick rope on the floor. "Ready to see what's behind that wall?" he asked, his voice light but his eyes serious. Evelyn nodded slowly. "If we're going to live here, we can't keep wondering." Jordan appeared at the top of the stairs, barefoot, rubbing his neck. "You guys are seriously doing this? Like digging up someone's secret bunker or whatever?" Marcus looked up at him, half amused, half stern. "You don't have to help, but you're not stopping me." "I'm not stopping you," Jordan muttered. "I just think it's dumb to mess with dead people's stuff." Liana trailed behind him, clutching her wooden doll. "Emma says it's okay," she said softly. Evelyn shot her a glance. "Sweetheart, remember what we talked about? Dolls don't talk." The girl smiled faintly. "Maybe not to everyone." The basement swallowed the light as they descended. The air down there always felt thicker, almost alive. Marcus's flashlight cut a trembling beam through the darkness, revealing shelves stacked with tools, jars of screws, and long-forgotten household supplies. At the far end of the room, the strange section of wall waited, smooth cement in a sea of rough stone, like a scar that refused to fade. The patch was newer than the rest, the edges uneven, almost rushed. Marcus ran his fingers over the surface. "This is it," he murmured. "Right here." Evelyn stood behind him, her arms folded. "Are you sure it's not just repairs? You said there was water damage." "Maybe," Marcus said, setting the crowbar against the wall, "but it feels hollow. Listen." He struck it lightly with the metal bar. The sound echoed, faint and hollow like an empty drum. "That's not solid foundation." He began chipping away at the cement. The sound was harsh in the confined space, metal striking stone, dust swirling in the air like pale smoke. Jordan stood near the stairs, flashlight trembling in his hand. "Dad, maybe you should stop. You don't know what's back there." "That's the point," Marcus grunted, driving the crowbar in deeper. The cement cracked with a dull pop. A thin line appeared, and cold air rushed out through it, carrying a faint metallic smell like rust or blood. Evelyn covered her nose. "What is that?" "Old air," Marcus said, though his voice had lost some of its steadiness. After nearly an hour of work, a section of the wall gave way. Beneath it was a narrow doorway, half-sealed and hidden behind wooden planks nailed in a cross. On one of them, faint letters had been scratched into the surface. Marcus wiped the dust away and read aloud, "Keep out." The words were old, carved with something sharp, uneven but desperate. Evelyn's voice was quiet but firm. "We shouldn't." Marcus hesitated, staring at the warning, then at her. If they were hiding something, maybe the missing family, maybe the truth, it's been sitting here for 50 years. Whatever it is, it's time to know. He pried off the boards one by one. The final plank groaned as it came free, and the door behind it creaked open with a sound that made Evelyn's skin crawl. The smell that escaped was stale, heavy, thick with age. Marcus shone the flashlight through the opening. The beam caught the edge of a small room, maybe 8 feet square, lined with stone and wood. Inside, the air shimmered faintly with dust. They stepped through slowly. The room was almost empty. Just an old table, a chair, and several boxes stacked in the corner. On the floor lay a thin layer of dirt and debris. Evelyn's eyes were drawn immediately to the table. There was something resting on it, a small reel-to-reel tape recorder, identical to the one Jordan had found upstairs, with a reel still loaded. Beside it was a stack of papers, yellowed with age, and a small key. Marcus approached the boxes first. He lifted one lid carefully, and a wave of musty air rose up. Inside were dozens of folders, each stamped with the same name: Sloan Industries, Private Contracts. He flipped one open and scanned the contents. Blueprints, invoices, bank transfers, he muttered. This is business stuff. Old deals. He paused, frowning. But these aren't normal. Look, these are city signatures, construction permits, zoning changes. He looked up at Evelyn. Evelyn picked up one of the papers on the table. It was a letter, typed but unsigned. If this reaches you, it means they've come for us. Don't trust the sheriff. Everything is hidden here under the old foundation. If you're reading this, please, don't let them erase us. Her hand trembled as she lowered the page. Marcus, she whispered, this isn't just a storage room. It's a message. Jordan hovered by the doorway, his face pale. Maybe they ran. Maybe they knew something bad was coming. Or maybe they were stopped before they could, Evelyn said. Her voice was barely a whisper now. Marcus picked up the tape recorder. It was dusty, but intact. A label on the reel read April 2nd, 1974. Meeting. He looked at the others stacked neatly beside it. We could hear what they knew. Evelyn hesitated. Do we really want to? But Marcus was already turning the knobs. The machine clicked and began to spin, its wheels turning with a faint whir. At first, only static filled the air. Then a voice, a man's, emerged, faint and trembling. This is David Sloan. If anyone finds this, I need you to understand. They said they'd protect us, but it's all lies. They're using the contracts to hide the money. The whole project, Red Falls Industrial Park, it's a cover. If they know I recorded this. There was a sharp sound on the tape, a door slamming, muffled shouting, a woman's voice crying out something unintelligible. Then static again. Marcus turned it off. No one spoke for several seconds. The only sound was their breathing and the low hum of the old machine. They were scared, Evelyn said finally. They knew something was coming. Marcus looked down at the key lying beside the recorder. It was small, brass, and marked with a number, 7. We'll find what it opens, he said quietly. That night, after they sealed the basement door again, the house seemed to breathe differently. The air upstairs felt heavier, the walls colder. Evelyn dreamed of water dripping behind the walls, of whispers she couldn't understand. When she woke, her heart was pounding, and she thought she heard footsteps in the hallway again. But this time, they didn't stop. They moved toward her door, slow and deliberate, and then paused. She held her breath. Nothing, only silence. In the morning, the children were restless. Liana refused to eat. "Emma doesn't like the basement," she said, staring at her bowl. "She says the family's still there." Jordan scoffed. "It's a doll, Liana. Stop saying that." But his voice wavered. He'd seen the hidden room too, and even he couldn't forget the smell of that sealed air. Marcus spent the day studying the papers. The more he read, the clearer the picture became. The Sloans had uncovered a massive fraud involving public contracts and city officials. When they tried to report it, the same officials had turned against them. The last entry in Mary Sloan's notebook, the recordings, the warning on the door, it all fit. They hadn't disappeared. They had been erased. That evening, as dusk fell, Evelyn lit candles in the living room. The generator had failed again, and the flickering light painted long shadows across the walls. Marcus sat beside her, the notebook open on his lap. "If we can prove what happened," he said, "maybe their story won't die here." Evelyn looked at him, her eyes weary. "And what about us? You think the people who covered this up will just let it go?" He didn't answer. Somewhere deep in the house, a pipe groaned, followed by the faint sound of something shifting in the walls. The wind outside pressed against the windows, whispering through cracks like breath against glass. Liana climbed onto Evelyn's lap, clutching her doll. "I heard someone talking," she murmured. "They said, 'Thank you.'" Evelyn brushed her hair back. "You probably dreamed it, honey." But when she met Marcus's gaze, she saw the same uneasy recognition. That night, as they prepared for bed, Jordan stood by the window, looking out over the dark forest. "Mom," he said quietly, "what if the house doesn't want us to leave? What if it's been waiting all this time?" She turned toward him, startled by the seriousness in his tone. "Waiting for what?" He shrugged. "For someone to finish the story." In the basement, beyond the sealed door, the tape recorder clicked once in the darkness, though no one was there to touch it. The reel spun half a turn before stopping again, leaving behind a faint hiss that drifted through the silence of the sleeping house. The truth was stirring, restless and alive, and the Harpers had already crossed the threshold from curiosity into inheritance. What they had found was not just a hidden room, but the beating heart of a mystery that had been buried for half a century. Morning broke sluggishly, pressing through the curtains in pale streaks that barely touched the dust floating in the still air. The house seemed quieter than usual, as though it had exhausted itself from keeping its secrets. Marcus stood by the kitchen sink, staring into the cup of coffee gone cold in his hands. He hadn't slept much. His mind kept returning to the sealed room, the recordings, the voice of David Sloan whispering from the past about corruption and betrayal. It haunted him not because of fear, but because of its unfinished edge, a sense that the man on the tape had been silenced mid-sentence. Evelyn joined him, her hair tied back, her face drawn but calm. The air between them was heavy with unspoken thoughts. "You're going back down there, aren't you?" she asked. Marcus didn't look up. "We can't just stop now. You saw those documents. Whatever happened here, it wasn't an accident. And if we don't understand it, we're just living in the middle of someone else's grave." She sat across from him, the sound of her chair scraping against the floor sharp in the stillness. "Maybe that's exactly what we're doing," she said quietly. "Maybe that's why this house feels like it's breathing, because it never got to rest." Jordan shuffled in, half awake, muttering something about the Wi-Fi not working again, but stopped when he saw their faces. "What now?" he asked, though his voice was small. "Dad found more stuff?" Marcus nodded. "We're checking the floor of that room today. There's something under it. I can feel it. Jordan frowned. Or maybe it's just a floor? No, Marcus said simply, his tone leaving no room for argument. It's hollow. By noon, the entire family was gathered again at the basement door. Liana clutched her doll tight against her chest, whispering to it in that secret way she had, while Evelyn tried not to let her nerves show. Marcus set up a lantern on a workbench, its orange glow pushing the shadows back just enough to reveal the old boards and pipes. When he pried open the door to the hidden room, the air that came out was colder than before, the smell of damp wood and long decayed paper. They stepped inside carefully, as though crossing a line they couldn't uncross. Marcus knelt and began tapping the floor with a hammer, slow and methodical. Each tap echoed with a dull, hollow ring, until one section near the back of the room gave a different sound, deeper, almost like knocking on a casket. He looked up at Evelyn. Here. He used the crowbar again, wedging it beneath the boards. They groaned in protest before coming loose. Beneath them lay a shallow cavity filled with dust and what looked like crumbling fabric. He brushed it aside and froze. There were boxes, small and metal, each marked with the same faded initials, DS. The latch on one had rusted shut, but Marcus forced it open. Inside were bundles of papers bound by rubber bands, old photographs, and cassette reels labeled with dates that stretched across the final months of 1973 and early 1974. Evelyn crouched beside him, her breath visible in the cold air. "Oh my God," she whispered. The photos were ordinary at first, the family smiling at a picnic, children with sparklers, a Christmas tree. But deeper in the stack, they changed. The last ones showed men in suits shaking hands in dim rooms, briefcases open on tables, the same faces appearing over and over again, one of them unmistakably wearing a sheriff's badge. Jordan picked up one of the tapes, brushing dust from the label. "It's all here," he said softly. Everything he said on that first recording, he was documenting them. He turned it over in his hand, then looked at his father. "Are we going to listen?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. They carried the box upstairs, setting it on the kitchen table like a sacred artifact. The house creaked as they moved, each sound amplified by the quiet. When Marcus pressed play, the tape whirred to life. David Sloane's voice filled the room again, tired but determined. April 5th. They came last night. Said it's too late to back out. They want the blueprints and the account ledgers. If I don't hand them over, they'll make an example of me. His breathing quickened on the tape, followed by a low murmur, the sound of another voice, muffled but unmistakably threatening. Then came Mary Sloane's voice, sharp with fear. "David, don't let them take the children," and then suddenly static. Evelyn covered her mouth. Jordan leaned back, eyes wide. Marcus shut the player off. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Liana spoke quietly. "They didn't get to run," she said. "Emma said they tried, but the bad men were already inside." Evelyn turned toward her slowly. "What did you say?" "Emma told me," Liana said simply, holding up the doll. "She said the house remembers everything." Speak, then stopped. It wasn't fear he felt exactly, but a deep unease that reached into something ancient, the instinct that told a person when they were being watched. That evening, the wind picked up outside, rattling the windows in their frames. The trees swayed against the darkening sky, their branches scraping against the stone walls. Marcus sat by the fire, the open box beside him, its papers spread across the floor. Evelyn read through a few of them, her eyes darting rapidly. "These are financial transfers," she said. "Large ones, offshore accounts. They were funneling money through the county projects. Bridges, schools, all fake. Sloan must have found out, and they silenced him for it." Marcus nodded, his jaw tight. "The question is who? If the sheriff was involved, that means the rot went deep." He flipped through another document, tracing a familiar signature. "Robert C. Holloway," he read. "Wasn't that the mayor back then?" Evelyn's brow furrowed. It was. And if this is real, he was laundering money through city contracts. Jordan paced restlessly. "So what? We tell someone? The cops? A reporter?" Evelyn shook her head. "And say what? That we found this in a haunted house? They'll think we're crazy. Or worse, they'll think we're looking for a payout." Marcus was silent. He knew she was right. The only way to make it matter was to prove the evidence was real, to find something indisputable. That night, as the others went to bed, he stayed awake, sifting through the papers by lantern light. He barely noticed when the wind outside shifted, carrying with it a faint rhythm, tapping like footsteps above. The boards overhead creaked once, then again. He froze, listening. The sound moved from one end of the hallway to the other, deliberate and slow. He told himself it was the wind, but when he looked toward the stairs, he saw it. A faint light flickering at the top landing, like the glow of a candle. He climbed halfway up before the light went out. When he reached the landing, there was only darkness and the faint smell of old perfume. A whisper brushed his ear, so faint it might have been his imagination. "Help us." The next morning, he said nothing about it. But Evelyn saw the sleeplessness in his eyes and didn't ask. They worked in silence, cataloging the papers and tapes, until Jordan came in from outside holding an envelope he'd found wedged in the mailbox. There was no stamp, no name, just a single sentence written across the front. "Stop digging." Marcus's stomach turned cold. "Who brought this here?" he asked, but Don Jordan only shrugged. "There was no car. It was just sitting there." Evelyn unfolded the paper inside. It was typed, clean, professional. "The Sloan matter is closed. Leave it buried for your own good." They looked at one another, the air between them thick with dread. Someone knew. Someone was watching. That night, the power went out again. The house sank into darkness, broken only by the orange flicker of their lanterns. Liana sat by the fireplace, humming softly to her doll while Evelyn locked the doors and windows. Marcus checked the yard with a flashlight but saw nothing, just fog and the outlines of trees. Yet, when he returned inside, there were wet footprints on the kitchen floor leading from the back door to the hallway and stopping abruptly, as if the person had vanished into the air. Evelyn stared at them, her voice trembling. "Marcus, the door was locked." They didn't sleep that night. The sounds returned, not footsteps this time, but faint, rhythmic knocking from beneath the floorboards, coming from the same place as the hidden room. It was slow at first, then faster, until Marcus couldn't take it any more. He grabbed the flashlight and descended the stairs. The knocking stopped the instant his foot touched the last step. The basement was empty. The door to the hidden room stood slightly ajar, though he was certain he'd closed it. Inside, the tape recorder sat on the table. Its reels began to spin on their own, turning slowly, whispering static into the darkness. He reached for the stop button, but before he could, the tape came alive with a voice. Not David's this time, but a woman's, broken, urgent. "If you hear this, they're in the house. Don't let them." The tape cut off abruptly, leaving the room in silence. Marcus stood frozen, the hair on his arms rising. When he looked down, he saw fresh footprints in the dust, small, bare, and leading toward the far wall. He backed away slowly, his breath visible in the cold. The house was no longer just a vessel for memory. It was speaking now, pushing its truth into the open. The secrets buried beneath its floors were clawing their way back to light, and Marcus realized they were still here, waiting for someone to finish what they had started. And now that he had heard their voices, he understood that leaving would no longer be an option. When he finally returned upstairs, the dawn had already begun to pale the windows. Evelyn and the children were huddled near the fire, their faces drawn, their eyes wide. She didn't ask what he had seen. She already knew. The house had crossed the line between silence and speech, and whatever it wanted to say was only just beginning. The morning after the knocking, the air in the house felt heavier, as though something unseen had settled into the walls during the night. Marcus moved through the rooms in silence, checking every door, every window, every lock twice. The sunlight filtering through the windows did nothing to warm the stone walls. Instead, it only made the shadows stand out sharper, darker. He found Evelyn sitting at the table with a mug of untouched coffee, her hands trembling slightly as she held the newspaper. The headline was about local elections and road repairs, nothing remarkable, but her eyes were fixed on the small black and white photo in the corner, the county sheriff shaking hands with the mayor. Sheriff Howard Hayward. Marcus saw the name and felt a chill crawl down his spine. "That's him," he said quietly. "The one on the tape. 50 years later, and he's still here." Evelyn looked up slowly, her voice low. "You think he knows about us?" Marcus hesitated before answering. He knew the Sloanes. If the corruption was covered up, he was part of it. And now that we found the evidence, he'll have a reason to come back. The thought hung between them like smoke. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the distant hum of an engine. Marcus turned toward the window just in time to see a white county truck pull up on the gravel road. The sheriff stepped out, older now, heavier, but with the same square shoulders and cold authority that came from years of command. His presence filled the space even before he reached the door. He knocked once, firm, deliberate. Evelyn tensed. Marcus motioned for the children to stay upstairs and open the door. "Morning," Sheriff Hayward said, his voice slow, heavy with that practiced tone of small-town friendliness that was more warning than greeting. "Heard someone finally bought the Sloan place. Folks in town been talking." Marcus nodded cautiously. "That's right. We're fixing it up." "That's so?" The sheriff stepped across the threshold without waiting for an invitation. "You know, people around here don't usually last long in this house. Always something wrong. Wiring, pipes, bad dreams." He gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You planning to stick around?" Evelyn appeared behind Marcus, her chin lifted. "We're not afraid of bad plumbing," she said. Hayward's gaze flicked toward her and then to the boxes still stacked by the wall. "I suppose you've been exploring. This place has a lot of history. Some of it best left alone." Marcus crossed his arms. "You mean the Sloanes?" The sheriff's expression didn't change, but the air seemed to tighten. "That was a long time ago. You folks don't need to worry about ghosts." Evelyn met his stare. "We're more concerned about the living." Something flickered in the old man's eyes, irritation or maybe warning. "Well," he said at last, tipping his hat, You call me if you find anything dangerous. Basements like this one, they've got all kinds of things that don't need digging up." He turned and walked out, the gravel crunching under his boots. The white truck rolled slowly down the road, leaving a thin trail of dust behind. For several minutes, neither Marcus nor Evelyn spoke. Then she whispered, "He knows. He was here for a reason." Marcus nodded grimly. "He's watching." That night, the unease that had settled over the house turned into something more tangible. Jordan claimed he saw headlights outside the gate around midnight. Evelyn heard the sound of gravel shifting, like footsteps pacing just beyond the fence. Marcus went out twice with a flashlight, finding nothing but tire tracks where there should have been none. By morning, someone had spray-painted the word "leave" on the side of the mailbox. They decided to contact a journalist. Marcus remembered a name from one of the reports he'd read online, a reporter from Detroit who'd written about old corruption cases. He made the call from a payphone in town, not trusting the house line. When the reporter, Dana Wells, answered, Marcus told her everything: the hidden room, the tapes, the documents. There was a long pause, then she said, "If what you're saying is true, that story never really died. The Sloan case was one of Michigan's great mysteries. No bodies, no arrests." Back at the house, Evelyn was packing some of the papers into boxes. "We can't keep them here," she said. "If he finds a way inside—" "He won't," Marcus interrupted, though his voice lacked conviction. She looked up at him. "You didn't see the way he looked at this place, like it already belonged to him." That evening, they locked everything away in the attic. The house groaned as it settled, the sounds of shifting beams and whispering wind merging into something almost human. Jordan helped move boxes up the narrow stairs. "What if this gets us killed?" he asked suddenly. Marcus stopped, the weight of the box pressing into his arms. "Then we'll die knowing the truth. That's more than the Sloans ever got." By the time the sun went down, a storm had rolled in from the lake. The wind beat against the windows, and the trees bent under the rain. The power went out again. Evelyn lit candles while Marcus checked the locks. The flickering light made their shadows dance across the walls like restless ghosts. Somewhere above them, something heavy shifted in the attic, the sound of a box being dragged across the floor. Marcus froze. "Stay here," he said, grabbing the flashlight. He climbed the stairs slowly, the beam trembling as he reached the attic door. It creaked open, revealing rows of boxes and trunks, all exactly as they had left them. Except for one. The box with the tapes was open, the reels spilled out across the floor. In the center of them lay the doll, Emma, her painted eyes staring straight ahead. He picked it up, his heart pounding. The wood was cold, damp as though it had just been pulled from water. When he carried it downstairs, Evelyn's face went pale. "Liana was asleep," she whispered. "How did it get up there?" Before Marcus could answer, a loud bang shook the house, the back door slamming open against the wind. He rushed toward it, flashlight slicing through the dark. The door stood wide, rain sweeping in. There were footprints on the porch, large, booted, fresh. He ran outside, shouting into the storm, but saw only darkness and the swaying trees. When he came back in, Evelyn was already on the phone with the county dispatcher, but the line crackled, dead. They didn't sleep that night either. The storm howled for hours, and every gust made the windows rattle like warning knocks. Around 3 a.m., they heard a truck engine outside, then silence. The next morning, Marcus found deep tire tracks in the mud near the gate. the same pattern as the sheriff's white pickup. The following day, Dana Wells arrived. She was younger than Marcus expected, sharp-eyed with a leather bag slung over her shoulder and a camera always in hand. "So, this is the infamous Sloan house," she said as she stepped inside. "Smells like history." Marcus led her to the boxes, explaining everything. When she saw the tapes, she whistled softly. "If these are what you say they are, this isn't just a ghost story. This is murder, corruption, and cover-up. But you realize what happens when we publish it, right? People like Hayward, they'll come after you." Evelyn didn't hesitate. "They already have." They spent the next few hours reviewing documents. Dana photographed each page carefully, labeling everything. The story was coming together. The Sloans had discovered financial fraud that implicated several local officials, including Hayward and Holloway. The family had prepared to go public, but before they could, they vanished. The official report claimed they fled the state. The truth, hidden in that sealed room, was far darker. By evening, Dana packed up her notes. "I'll drive back to Detroit tonight," she said. "File what I have and return tomorrow. We'll get protection once this hits the network." But Marcus wasn't reassured. He watched her car headlights disappear down the road and felt a deep unease in his gut. The night was too still. An hour later, the phone rang, a landline they hadn't used in days. Evelyn hesitated before picking it up. There was static on the line, then a familiar voice. "Mrs. Harper, this is Sheriff Hayward. I heard you had visitors today." Reporters. Evelyn froze. "We spoke to someone about the history of this property," she said carefully. "That's all." Hayward's tone hardened. "Be careful who you talk to. Some stories are better left untold. You got kids, don't you?" The line went dead. Marcus stood motionless, fists clenched. "He's threatening us," he said. "He's terrified we'll expose him." Evelyn's voice shook. "Then we have to go. Tonight." "No," Marcus said firmly. "If we leave, he wins. The truth dies here again." But before they could argue further, headlights flared through the window. Two beams cutting across the front yard. A car engine idled outside. Marcus grabbed the flashlight and peered through the curtain. It wasn't Hayward's truck. It was a sedan, black, unfamiliar. For hours, it stayed there. They could see the faint glow of a cigarette inside, the ember flaring red now and then. Watching, waiting. At dawn, the car was gone. In its place, a note had been nailed to the front door. "You were warned." Evelyn's hands shook as she read it. Liana clung to her mother's leg, eyes wide. Jordan whispered, "Dad, we can't stay." Marcus looked at the house, the heavy stone walls, the shuttered windows. "This place isn't just haunted by ghosts," he said quietly. "It's haunted by guilt. And the people who caused it are still out there." He turned back to them, his expression hardened. "We're not leaving. We finished this. For the Sloans and for us." That night, the power returned briefly, just long enough for the old radio on the mantel to flicker to life again. The voice that came through wasn't from any station. It was a man's. Tired, distant. "If you can hear me, tell them the truth. Don't let them bury us again." Then the radio died, leaving only static and the sound of Evelyn's quiet sobbing. The house stood silent after that, but beneath its floorboards something stirred again, not in menace, but in awakening. The storm outside had passed, but the one within the walls was only beginning. And as the Harpers sat huddled together by the fire, the realization settled over them like a shadow. The truth they had uncovered was no longer a secret. It was a warning. And now, everyone who had tried to bury it would come for them. The sun rose over Red Falls pale and cold, its light cutting through a low mist that hung across the trees. Inside the stone mansion, the Harpers were already awake. No one had really slept. The night had stretched endlessly, filled with the sound of the wind brushing the windows and the faint groaning of the old beams. Evelyn sat by the window in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Marcus stood near the fireplace, staring into the smoldering ashes of last night's fire, as if searching for answers there. Every sound, the creak of the walls, the shift of a branch outside, made them flinch. The note nailed to their door lay on the table between them, its words burned into their minds. You were warned. When Jordan came downstairs, he didn't speak. He just looked at them, his face pale, eyes wide with something beyond fear. Disbelief that the danger had followed them from the shadows of the past into their present. What are we going to do? He finally asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. He turned toward the window where the driveway wound through the fog like a gray ribbon. We wait for Dana, he said at last. She's the only one who can make this public. Once it's out, they can't stop it. But Evelyn shook her head. If she's still alive, she whispered. The words hung there, heavy and terrible. The reporter had left the night before with a car full of evidence, and since then there had been nothing. No call, no message. Marcus tried to dismiss the thought, but the unease gnawed at him. Outside, the mist didn't lift. It thickened, wrapping the house in a curtain of white. Around noon, a knock echoed through the hallway. The sound was sharp, deliberate. Evelyn froze, her breath caught in her throat. Marcus motioned for her to stay back and walked to the door. He opened it a crack. A young man stood outside, raincoat dripping, a camera slung over his shoulder. Mr. Harper? I'm with Channel 8 News. Dana Wells sent me. His voice was calm, practiced. She couldn't make it back, so she sent me to get your statement. Relief flooded through Marcus, though it was quickly tempered by suspicion. Dana sent you? He asked. The man nodded. She said the story's going national. We just need confirmation. Footage of the evidence. A few words from you. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Evelyn's unease deepened. What happened to her? She asked. Is she okay? The man hesitated just a fraction too long before saying, She's fine. She just had to stay in Detroit for now. Marcus stepped aside reluctantly and let him in. The man's gaze flicked across the living room, pausing on the old boxes stacked by the fireplace. This the material? Marcus nodded slowly. You'll get your footage, he said, but not before I hear from Dana myself. The stranger's smile tightened. You can trust me. But before Marcus could respond, Jordan came down the stairs holding his phone. Dad, he said, his voice shaken, you need to see this. He handed Marcus the phone. The news alert on the screen showed Dana's name and a headline, Investigative journalist found dead in car crash outside Detroit. The room seemed to tilt. Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as he looked up at the man in the raincoat. The stranger's expression. I'm sorry, he said quietly, reaching into his coat, but you should have listened to the warning. Marcus reacted on instinct, grabbing the nearest object, a fire poker, and swinging it. The man stumbled back, his gun clattering to the floor. Jordan lunged forward, kicking it away, while Evelyn pulled Liana into the hallway. Marcus pinned the intruder against the wall, his voice low and furious. "Who sent you?" The man's lip curled. "Same people who buried the Sloanes." He pushed hard, throwing Marcus off balance, and darted for the door. Jordan shouted, but by the time Marcus reached the porch, the stranger had vanished into the mist, leaving only footprints that led halfway down the drive before disappearing. They locked every door, every window, hearts pounding. Liana was crying softly, whispering to her doll. "Emma says we have to finish it now, or they'll come again." Evelyn knelt beside her, brushing away the tears. "We will," she said, though she didn't know how. By afternoon, the phone lines were dead again. Marcus used the old CB radio he'd found in the attic, tuning through static until finally a voice came through. Faint, distant, but clear enough. "This is Channel 8. Who is this?" "This is Marcus Harper," he said quickly. "I have evidence of a cover-up in Red Falls, documents, recordings, everything. Dana Wells was killed because of it." There was a pause, then the voice said, "Stay where you are. We're sending a crew." The signal cut. Evelyn didn't believe they'd come. "They'll try to silence it again," she said. "They've done it before." Marcus turned toward her, his face drawn but resolute. "Then we make sure they can't. We send everything ourselves, online, everywhere." Jordan nodded. "I can do it. I saved copies of the photos on my laptop." He hurried to the table, opening the device, his fingers flying over the keyboard. But before he could upload anything, the screen went black. He tried again. Nothing. The laptop was dead. "Battery's fine," he said, panicking. "It's like something wiped it." Outside, a low rumble grew louder, the sound of engines. Marcus ran to the window. 2 vehicles were approaching the gate, a police cruiser and a black SUV. "It's him," Marcus said. "Hayward." The sheriff climbed out first, followed by 2 men in plain clothes. He called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "Mr. Harper, I'm here to talk. You're making a lot of noise about things you don't understand." Marcus didn't move. Evelyn whispered, "He won't just talk." "I know," Marcus said. Hayward took another step forward, the men beside him spreading out slightly. "Let's be reasonable," he said. "You've got children in there. Nobody wants trouble. Just hand over the tapes." Marcus shouted through the door, "They're already gone." It was a lie, but it made Hayward pause. "You can't stop this," Marcus added. "It's over." The sheriff's smile was thin and cold. "Son, nothing is ever over. It just gets forgotten again." A flash of light cut across the yard, the sudden glare of headlights turning the mist into a glowing wall. Another car was approaching from the main road, fast. Hayward turned, shielding his eyes. The vehicle skidded to a stop, and a tall man jumped out, waving something in his hand. "Federal warrant," he shouted. "Step away from the property." The agents moved first. Hayward's men reached for their guns, but the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Within seconds, more cars emerged from the fog. Marked vehicles this time, not the sheriff's. The man in front identified himself as Agent Cook from the Department of Justice. "We've been monitoring Wells's investigation," he said. "We know what's happening here." Evelyn clutched Liana, trembling. Jordan stared through the window, hardly daring to breathe. Marcus opened the door slowly. "You know about the Sloanes?" he asked. Cook nodded grimly. "We do now. The tapes, the documents, they match old evidence that was buried decades ago. The sheriff's department was involved in contract fraud and multiple disappearances. It ends today." Hayward's face darkened. "You can't prove anything," he said, but the agents were already moving toward him. They handcuffed him on the spot, along with the 2 men beside him. As they were led away, Hayward looked back at Marcus, his expression bitter, almost resigned. "You think this brings them back?" he muttered. "You think this house will ever stop remembering?" The agent spent hours inside the mansion, photographing the hidden room, collecting the tapes and papers. One of them told Evelyn quietly, "You did the right thing." But even after the last car left and the flashing lights faded into the distance, the Harpers didn't feel relief. The silence that followed felt deeper than before. The house was no longer an enemy. It was exhausted, emptied, as though it had been holding its breath for years and could finally exhale. That night, they sat together by the fire. Jordan fell asleep first, his head resting on his mother's shoulder. Liana placed her doll on the mantel and whispered something only she could hear. Evelyn looked at Marcus. "Do you think it's over?" she asked. He stared into the flames for a long time before answering. "For them, maybe. For us, it's just beginning." Outside, the fog was lifting. The first stars appeared, sharp and bright against the dark sky. Somewhere deep in the woods, an owl called once, then fell silent. Inside the old stone mansion, the air felt lighter, though beneath the floor, beneath the foundation, the past still whispered faintly, echoes of a family that had finally been heard. The next morning, the news spread across the country. Cold case solved, missing family exposés, decades-old corruption. Photos of the Sloanes appeared beside images of the Harpers standing on the mansion's porch. The nation's attention turned to Red Falls, the small town that had buried its guilt under stone and silence. Marcus read the headline aloud, his voice quiet. Evelyn leaned against him, closing her eyes. "They'll finally rest," she said, but as they prepared to start anew, repainting the walls, opening windows that had been shut for years, the house still carried a faint hum, a presence not of anger, but of gratitude. When Liana walked through the hall that afternoon, she swore she heard laughter upstairs, soft and distant, like children playing far away. She turned to her mother and smiled. "They're happy now," she said simply. Evelyn looked towards the staircase, where sunlight pooled like gold on the steps, and for the first time since they had arrived, she believed it. Outside, beyond the trees, the wind carried away the last remnants of winter. The world moved on, but the mansion remained, a monument to truth, to courage, and to the ghosts that had finally found their voice. And though the Harpers would always remember the fear, they would also remember something stronger. That even the darkest house can be taught to breathe again when someone dares to open its doors and let the light in. Spring came late to Red Falls that year. The snow melted slowly, reluctant to leave the ground after such a long and haunted winter. The trees on the hillside behind the stone mansion began to bud again, thin green shoots pushing through the cracks in the cold earth. For the first time since they had moved in, the Harpers woke to birdsong instead of silence. The old house, too, seemed to breathe differently now, no longer tight and watching, but lighter, like something had finally loosened deep within its walls. Yet, even in this new stillness, traces of the past lingered, as if the Sloane story had become part of the very air they breathed. Marcus stood on the porch, coffee steaming in the morning light, staring out across the clearing where the FBI trucks had once parked. The ground was still marked by their heavy tires, two parallel scars in the earth that rain hadn't yet washed away. He thought of the night the agents had come, the flashing lights reflected in the windows, the look on Sheriff Hayward's face when the handcuffs clicked shut. The news called it the Red Falls Redemption. Reporters had come from all over, Detroit, Chicago, even New York, turning their quiet nightmare into a national spectacle. But the cameras had long since left, and now only the family remained, quietly rebuilding both the house and themselves. Inside, Evelyn was painting the living room walls. The pale color she chose, something between cream and sunrise, made the space feel almost new. Every stroke of the brush was an act of defiance against the decay that had once ruled the mansion. She hummed softly, a tune from her childhood, her movements rhythmic and sure. For weeks she had refused to go near the basement, but now she spoke of turning it into a small memorial, a place where the Sloan story could live on, not as a tragedy, but as a lesson. Jordan helped her, though he often stopped to stare out the window toward the woods. Since the confrontation, he had grown quieter, more thoughtful. He spent hours recording videos on an old camcorder, narrating the story of their discovery in his own words. "People need to know the truth," he said one evening when Evelyn asked what he was doing. "Not just what happened to the Sloans, but what happens when people stay silent. Maybe it'll make someone listen next time." Liana, too, had changed. She no longer clung to the doll the way she once had, though Emma still sat on the mantel in the living room, her painted eyes glinting softly in the sunlight. Sometimes Evelyn caught Liana talking to her in whispers, not frightened, just gentle, as if sharing secrets with an old friend. When asked what she said, the girl only smiled. "She's not lonely anymore," she'd reply. The town of Red Falls had changed as well. For years it had lived in the shadow of the missing family, pretending not to remember. Now, with the truth exposed, it was as if a long curse had been broken. A local paper printed an apology to the Sloan descendants, and townspeople who had once mocked the Harpers now waved when they drove by. A few even came to help with repairs, bringing lumber, paint, and food. Old Mrs. Daly, who ran the diner on Main Street, delivered pies every Sunday, always saying the same thing. That house needed good people again. Maybe it'll finally rest. Still, Marcus often woke in the middle of the night to the sound of the wind threading through the cracks in the stone. It was not fear that woke him now, but memory. He would lie there listening, half expecting to hear the faint tapping that had haunted them before. But there were no knocks anymore. Only the sigh of the house settling deeper into the earth it had stood on for nearly 50 years. One evening, as he sat by the fire, he opened the last of the tapes they had found, a reel they hadn't dared play before the FBI arrived. He fed it into the old recorder, hesitating before pressing play. The voice that came through was softer than the others, almost tender. "If you're hearing this," Mary Sloan said, "it means someone found us. Please, whoever you are, don't be angry for what you've learned here. We only wanted to protect our children. Tell them we loved them. Tell them the truth matters, even when it costs you everything." The tape ended with a crackle, followed by silence so deep Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. He sat there for a long time before calling Evelyn and the children. Together they listened to it again, and when it ended, no one spoke. Liana reached for her mother's hand. "She sounds kind," the girl whispered. Evelyn nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "She was a mother," she said. "That's what kindness sounds like when you have nothing left." From that night on, the basement became something else. Marcus and Evelyn cleared it out completely, repainting the walls and setting up small glass cases for the documents and photographs that had survived. They hung the Sloan's family portrait by the door, the faces restored and smiling faintly, as if they had been waiting all this time. A plaque beneath it read, "The House That Remembered." Locals began visiting, quietly, respectfully. Teachers brought students. Journalists returned to write about the transformation. The house that had once terrified the town was now a place of remembrance. But even as life crept back into the mansion, reminders of the past appeared in small, inexplicable ways. One morning, Evelyn found fresh flowers, white lilies, laid neatly on the stone steps. No one in the family had placed them there. Another evening, Marcus swore he heard laughter echoing faintly from the upper hallway, the sound of children at play. He followed it, but found nothing except the open door to the room where Liana liked to read. On her desk lay the wooden doll, turned toward the window, a faint smile carved in its tiny face. As weeks passed, peace returned in ways they hadn't imagined possible. The nightmares that had once plagued Marcus faded. Jordan started writing about his experiences for school, and his essay, titled "The House That Lived Again," was published in a state youth anthology. Evelyn began organizing community events at the mansion. Story nights, art displays, gatherings that filled the rooms with voices and light. The laughter of neighbors replaced the echoes of fear. One evening in late spring, they hosted a small ceremony in the yard. People from town came with candles and flowers, forming a circle under the wide branches of the old oak. A local pastor said a few words about truth, redemption, and the endurance of memory. When it was over, Evelyn lit the last candle herself and set it at the base of the oak tree. "For Mary and David, and for all who were silenced," she said softly. The flame. After the crowd left, Marcus stood for a while, watching the light shimmer through the windows. The house glowed softly, golden and alive. He thought of all that had happened, the fear, the danger, the revelations, and realized how much the house mirrored their own family. Both had been broken, both had been haunted by loss, and both had found a way to heal through truth. He turned to Evelyn. "We should give it a name," he said. She smiled, her eyes reflecting the candlelight. "We already have," she replied, "the House of Truth." In the weeks that followed, news crews returned one last time, not to chase a scandal, but to film a documentary about the Harpers and the legacy of the Sloanes. They filmed Liana placing flowers by the portrait, Jordan giving a short interview about courage, and Evelyn speaking quietly about forgiveness. "This house held pain for so long," she said to the camera, "but pain isn't permanent. It only lingers when we hide from it. We didn't defeat the darkness here, we just gave it somewhere to rest." When the documentary aired, letters began to arrive from across the country. Some from families of other cold cases, others from people simply moved by the story. They all said the same thing: "You reminded us that truth matters." Evelyn kept every letter in a box under the stairs. One night in early summer, long after the cameras were gone and the house had settled into its quiet rhythm again, Marcus woke to the sound of soft footsteps. For a moment, his old fear returned, but then he realized they were light, playful, almost like dancing. He rose and followed them down the hall to the living room. The moon shone through the tall windows, silvering the floor. In the pale light he thought he saw faint outlines, children's shadows darting and spinning, a woman's form watching from near the fireplace. They weren't frightening, only peaceful, bathed in the soft glow of the night. He didn't move, didn't speak, only watched as the shapes faded slowly into the air. When Evelyn joined him moments later, he whispered, "They're free now." She took his hand, her fingers warm against his. "So are we," she said. They stood there until the first light of dawn began to push the darkness back once more. By autumn, the house had become something more than a home. It was a symbol, a reminder that even places soaked in tragedy could bloom again. Tourists came to see it, but not out of morbid curiosity. They came to feel the strange peace that had taken root there. The local government declared it a historical site, naming it the House of Truth. A plaque by the gate read, "Once a place of silence, now a voice for those who were lost." On the one-year anniversary of the Sloanes' discovery, the Harpers invited the townspeople for a remembrance evening. The rooms were filled with light and laughter, the sound of piano music drifting through open windows. Outside, lanterns floated up into the night sky, hundreds of tiny stars carrying prayers and forgiveness. Liana watched them rise, her face glowing. "They're going home," she said quietly. Evelyn knelt beside her. "Maybe they already are." Later, when the guests were gone and the candles had burned low, Marcus stepped outside one last time. The air was cool, the moon bright above the house. He turned back toward it and smiled. The stone walls that had once seemed so cold now reflected the faint warmth of the lamps inside. It was no longer a monument to pain, but to perseverance. He whispered into the quiet, not expecting an answer, but feeling it all the same. "Thank you," he said, to the Sloanes, to the house, to the past that had brought them here. And as the wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the soft scent of spring, the house stood silent and strong, bathed in moonlight. Inside, life went on, warm, ordinary, filled with laughter and memory. The darkness that had once ruled these halls had been replaced by something far stronger. Hope. If you were moved by this story, don't leave just yet. Hit that subscribe button so you won't miss the next mystery waiting to be uncovered. Watch our other shocking true life stories right now and share this video with someone who loves uncovering the truth behind forgotten places. Every